everyone. I just wanted to tell you about this very amazing conference called inspirED. It's a great opportunity for everybody to come and know different perspective on what people think about education as reality and their life experience. It's a great opportunity and I would love all of you to come, see and learn from each other. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone, to day 4 of our sessions. So we're going to start first with an amazing session. It's titled "What's Your Jugaad" by Shameen Mehrotra and Sajida Vadgama. So Shameen is a director, school outreach services, senior therapist, and a member of the senior management team at Umeed Child Development Center for over 15 years. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, USA, over the Masters of Science in Education and Psychological Services, as well as from the University of Mumbai with an additional master's degree in applied psychology. We also have Sajida. She graduated from the University of Mumbai with a bachelor's in history and psychology and is currently pursuing her master's in psychology. She was a Teach for India fellow for 2 years, teaching 9th and 10th grade students in a BMC school. She brings with her diverse experience as a teacher within the government school space, as well as knowledge and expertise in liaising with relevant stakeholders within the broader space of education. Welcome, Shameen and Sajida. Thank you so much for coming. Over to you for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and it feels so great to just be in this space. And thank you so much for creating this collaborative space where we dream together and really come together to listen, learn, and share. So thank you so much. Shameen, over to you.
Sure. Thank you for having us here and giving us this opportunity. And I just want to start with, talking a little bit about what Sajida and me do. So Sajida and me are actually part of something called the school outreach team at Umeed. And for those of you all who don't know what Umeed is a not-for-profit organization where we work with children with developmental disabilities. And really, as part of the school outreach team, what our hope is to work with schools to get them to be more inclusive and get them to engage more effectively with children with diverse needs. So we've ended up working with a whole host of schools and school systems, from government schools to low-income affordable private schools to the higher-end schools. And I guess what we've experienced over, the last couple of years that we've been working in the system is that, we've been, a large part of our work has focused on actually supporting teachers and building capacities within schools. And in that, part of what we've experienced is that oftentimes in that need to constantly support children and engage them more effectively, the voice of the teacher sort of, is completely just not heard. And it really just becomes about what the teacher should be doing, what the teacher should not be doing. And that critical element of the mental health of the teachers actually ends up falling through the cracks. So that's something that Sajida and me and the team, at Umeed is really passionate about. And we really feel that in order to be able to support children effectively, teachers need to take care of their own mental health. And, so that's a large part of, what we end up doing in our sessions with teachers. And Sajida, do you want to add to that before I move on?
Yeah, exactly, Shameen. I mean, as you said, while we were engaging in, especially post-COVID, I mean, we've been engaging in these conversations for the longest time, for 2 years. But I think what we really, what came out is how are teachers having that voice even to speak about topics of mental health, where culturally we are not taught to speak about these things, and how, even just beginning these conversations in spaces like this, and as we talk more about it, what are the spaces that we can think about to kind of, have these conversations going?
Yeah. And, when we talk about mental health, oftentimes when, Sajida and me have done these sessions with teachers and we ask teachers, what do you think about mental health? Like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind, or what do you understand by the term mental health? A lot of what we get to hear is that they say it's about being happy. And I really want to take this opportunity to just, take a few minutes to talk about the fact that while that's not completely untrue, mental health is a lot more. It's really about being able to express and articulate all the feelings and emotions that you're experiencing and doing it in a way that feels safe and comfortable. So I think that's the crux of it. I think there's a reason that WhatsApp has that whole bunch of emojis and not just a smiley face, because it is really important for us to express and articulate everything in totality. And yes, it may be the ultimate end may be to experience a sense of fulfillment, happiness. We can use various different words for it, but it involves the whole range of emotions and feelings. So, if I look back to the past couple of months, and that this COVID pandemic has created for us, it's not been easy for anybody. In fact, the other day we were part of a session where I heard someone say that the COVID pandemic itself has actually created a whole other pandemic, which is related to mental health concerns. And, that's something that's really stayed with me, because if I look back to the past 6 months, it's really been a time of uncertainty, unpredictability, and it's been a huge source of anxiety for all of us. I mean, for the kids we work with, for the families we work with, for us as individuals too, because no one really knew what was going to happen. I mean, the reality is nobody still knows what's going to happen. We're all, living in that bubble, hoping the vaccine will come out, hoping this will happen, hoping that will happen. And that's great, because I think we thrive on hope. But if I think from the school context, the teachers have been at the receiving end of a large amount of this anxiety, because really they've been thrown into this, concept and construct of online teaching. And it's nothing that any of us have been sort of trained for, prepared for. So it's not only being thrown into something that you don't necessarily know how to do, but now they're not only also teaching the student, but oftentimes they're teaching the student's mom and dad, and also sometimes the extended family. So they're constantly being watched and perhaps judged while, trying to do their jobs. And, that in itself is a stressful environment to be in. So it's really thrown up so many issues and mental health concerns over these past couple of months. And, I just feel that, very little is sort of being done to address that, because really, although people have been talking about mental health, right now, the focus is more about what the teacher should be doing, what they're not doing quite right, what they should be doing better. And really, a large part of what my interest and Sajida's interest is really trying to, support teachers to become more aware about their own mental health. So, one of the things that, we've been doing at Umeed is actually having sessions for teachers where we really support them to become more aware about their own mental health, and talk about, a word that Sajida and me really love to use, and we at Umeed, a lot of us at Umeed really love to use, and it's called jugaad. And it may be a cultural thing. So I know that a lot of people in Bombay use it, but I'm pretty sure people across India use it a lot. And what jugaad really means is like these life hacks that you sort of use to respond in certain ways that are meaningful to individuals. So really those sessions are to, of course, bring awareness about the importance of taking care of oneself and taking care of one's own mental health. But also really thinking through what are the small and not so small things that teachers have been doing to respond to, this period of stress, anxiety, and any other mental health concern that they're experiencing. So we've heard in those sessions that teachers have been, doing small things like having a cup of chai, which may seem really small for one individual, but in another family, having a cup of chai by yourself is a huge thing. So it may seem small to some people, but really just taking the time to have a cup of chai by yourself, thinking through your day, being a little reflective, or just taking that pause to think about nothing is also a big thing for a couple of people. So they've been, they spoke about things like, having chai. Someone spoke about being able to take the time to play Candy Crush on their phone. Somebody spoke about how video calling their family has now become something that really gives them, a sense of comfort and a sense of balance. So there are so many things that people spoke about. And I think the common theme ended up being that, we've used this time to actually learn new skills. And, it's been a time where we've really been productive. A lot of people spoke about how they've taken up new hobbies. They've started cooking. They've started doing their stitching. And they've started doing a lot of these things that they meant to do, but they didn't actually have the time to do in terms of learning a new skill. And I just want to pause here for a minute, because, the one thing I do want to say is that in itself, sometimes having those conversations can also seem to be an anxiety-provoking experience for a couple of teachers and for individuals, because I think the word productive being the key word, and everybody is talking about how they can make this time and be most productive. But I think we need to recognize that sometimes productivity is not only about doing something or learning something. I mean, the fact that we've all made it through these 6 months and are sitting here today listening, and talking about this in itself is a huge achievement. And I think that's something that we need to hold on to, that oftentimes our ways of responding to mental health concerns may be very, very different. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to learn something new. I mean, just taking that time out to pause and give yourself that time to do nothing, which is also a skill, because a lot of us are not used to doing nothing. We're not used to sitting at home and working from home and then taking those gaps. We're not used to our work being spaced out the entire day. We're not used to doing housework and in addition doing, our other duties, and in addition playing roles that we play in terms of being a daughter or someone's spouse or someone's sister or someone's mother. So, there are so many things we're doing that sometimes just to do nothing also is a skill. We need to figure out how to do that. And I think on that note, I want to let Sajida talk a little bit about, how we've been thinking about the importance of making mental health care accessible to people and really building communities of care where teachers can feel safe in school environments to be able to support themselves as well as the children around them and the children that they work with.
Yeah, and as you said, Shamin, the word jugaad, we do talk about mental health, and I think everybody's understanding of mental health also comes from their own lived experiences. I think what COVID has really made us think back and reflect as to what are these alternative discourses about mental health? What are the other stories about mental health that we can together? I mean, we have been reimagining science and math and all of that. How can we reimagine the discourses about mental health? Some of the ways that we do at Umeed to take mental health conversations outside the confines of the therapy room and bringing it into our day-to-day life. So we've been exploring, and this is an invitation to the entire community who is joined here today as to how can we all collectively think about a world that we co-create these communities of care. How can our schools look like community of care? How can we have a world of care, of justice, of interdependence? Let's think about our sports activities once the school starts, or our libraries. How can we have our children literature as communities of care to explore more ideas and to add on this collective documentation of all the jugaads that we are doing for ourselves, and how do we build these communities at Umeed? We have this invitation to all of you all to join us in these discussions for not only the next 3 days, but feel free to reach out to any of us wherein we come together and we talk about how do we create these communities of care and redefine the meaning of mental health. Also get in touch with our own internal resources, the jugaads that we have all been already doing, just to make it visible for ourselves and the people around us. So, Shamin, would you like to add something to what our experience have been around this?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I really would like to talk about is that there is no right or wrong way to do this. I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, that everybody has their own different ways of responding. And really, sometimes we look at other people for inspiration, for motivation, but their way may not necessarily be our way. I think it's drawing on the strengths from other people and using that to build up your own strengths. So of course, you learn from the people around you. Like I said, you may use them as a source of inspiration, but at the end of the day, the way you respond to a situation may be very, very different. And that's not making it right or wrong. That's just making it valuable and meaningful for you. And that's what's most important when we talk about taking care of ourselves and taking care of our mental health. So I think, like Sajida said, to end, really like to leave you all with the thought of, because we're educators, a lot of teachers, a lot of, mental health professionals, counselors, a whole variety of people in this session today, really just to think about how can we make our education system a safer place to be? How can we make our schools a safer place to be? And we don't have to do anything really big or grand. I mean, can we do that one thing to make a difference? Can we, have that one conversation with that one child that will make a difference to his or her life? So it's just the small things. Maybe, I'm really going to urge people and encourage you all to just think of one thing you all would like to do differently when you all go back and, work in any way that you'll work or interact with the kids and families that you'll work with. Try and do one thing differently that would really support thinking about and building awareness about their mental health, of course, but also your mental health. And, what is that one thing that you would like to do differently? So I know that we just have 1 minute left. And there are a couple of questions that we're seeing on the chat. So perhaps I could just answer one. There's a question from Anjum which says that there seems to be no working hours, especially since we are working from home. And how can we switch off? Anjum, that's a really hard question. I think the easiest way to switch off is literally switch off. Put the laptop away, put the computer away, put the phone away, and take that time for yourself. I think it's a matter of really setting boundaries for yourself in your given constraints. And of course, looking at the practicalities of it, perhaps you take a couple of hours in the day off. Perhaps you say, okay, on a particular day, I'm just going to switch off completely. So again, like I said, there's never a right or a wrong way to do things, but it's really important that you do that. It is really important. The key word being is switching off for some time, and switching off may look very different for different people, but really switching off in terms of, the thought of work, the thought of having to, produce, be productive, just give yourself that time. I think you need it, you deserve it. We've all earned it by, being in this situation for the last 6 months. So give yourself a little pat on the back and take that time out as and when you need to do that.
Yeah. I think we are at 3:15, so I would just like sign off with this thought, saying a lot of gratitude and also like celebrating the beginning of this conversation. So I take this as this beginning, and may the conversations around this go on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sajida and Shamin. We had a few questions in the chat box. Thank you for addressing those as well. People were also sharing that they use meditation, prayer, yoga to keep their mental health in place. Some of them also said, interacting with teachers students help them to forget their problems when they get on Zoom call to see their students. It was really wonderful to see that.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for this. Dear viewers, please stay tuned for the next session.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Muskan and I am a spoken word poet, and I'd like to encourage all of you to come and be a part of a very special conference called inspirED, where educators and influencers from different countries will come and talk about education and its policies. So don't miss this opportunity. It's fully free and you will even get a certificate for this. Make sure you're signing up for it, and I hope you have a great experience. Thank you.
Yes, perfect sense. Welcome back, everyone, to the next session. We have a wonderful panel here. This is a panel discussion on career awareness and readiness from school to career. So this is moderated by Priya Agrawal. She is the founder and director of Antrang Foundation with 28 years of experience across advertising, market research, education, and employability. We also have the panelist, Devashish Thar. He's a public policy specialist at the Office of Vice Chairman, Niti Aayog, Government of India's think tank. He has work experience across policy making, consulting, speech writing, and equity research. We have Manisha. She is the head of CSR and philanthropy, India for JP Morgan, and is a member of the global philanthropy team. She manages all grants for India, driving the firm's philanthropy and employee engagement strategy across the country. We have Sarah. She is a design research manager, opportunity for all youth. She has experience working in youth employment, entrepreneurship, and leadership programs in Canada, housed in the Emirates Solution Lab in Toronto. We have Shahida. She's on monitoring and evaluation team at Antarang Foundation. She's on our panel as the youth representative and is a strong advocate for youth employability. Thank you so much for coming here. Welcome, everyone. Over to you for the panel discussion.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you, TFI and FIPKI, for giving us this opportunity to host this extremely important discussion. So after school, what? This critical transition from high school to higher secondary or vocational education needs clarity and thought, especially in the light of the new education policy, talking about having one of its goals is increasing the gross enrollment ratio into higher education, right? And also in the light of the right to education extending to age 18, becoming a reality pretty soon. It is imperative that every child stays on in education at least until the age of 18 and makes informed transitions on from high school into higher education or work. This panel will focus on the role of career awareness and career readiness in informing this transition. I have the absolute pleasure of having multiple viewpoints on this panel. We have Shaida, who's recently made the transition and has a lived experience of the transition. We have Manisha, who's worked with several organizations, supported several organizations in the ecosystem and has a varied perspective and a very diverse multi-sectoral perspective on this. We have Sarah, who brings in an international perspective, especially a developed nation perspective, and Devashish, who brings in the government perspective as well. So let's get started right away. My first question is really to Shahida, because you are at the center and your age group is at the center of this discussion. You recently made the transition from education to work. Your younger brother recently completed school. So what are some of the challenges and issues that young people like you face in this decision of after school what?
Okay, thank you, Priyadi, for having me here. Thank you, everyone. So if I talk about few of the challenges, I would say that most of us are the first generation learner. So as being a first generation learner, what we really lack is support from our parents and our society. And even if I talk about our siblings, the first generation siblings, even sometimes they are the first generation itself or have not completed education. And given to this, our young people are left on their own to make decisions on education, career, and the next step without a proper thought process. And currently, if I talk about a student coming from a public school or government school, or even talk about junior college, they really don't have anyone to help them to decide what is the next step for them, which really needs the student to make decisions on education and career choices that are not really falling in their favor.
Absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. The lack of a guide or somebody to actually guide you. Absolutely. Thanks, Shahida, for that perspective. Manisha, if I may ask you, you've seen the issues and challenges of this transition in pretty close quarters through the several organizations that we've supported over the years. So what, according to you, is really the critical issue that needs to be addressed in this transition?
So I think Shahida has kind of hit the nail on the head from the perspective of young people who are making this transition. There is no guidance to help them figure out how to get to their aspirational jobs. There's very little guidance in terms of what their capabilities are. So there may be aspirations which are defined by peer groups, by sort of external stimulus, but those may not really be best what their inherent capability is towards. So I think that is one thing that is that is missing pretty significantly for a lot of young people. And Priya, some of your research also shows that. And the second thing, sort of more from a larger school to work transition perspective, at a macro systemic level, we see that employer engagement in this process is very limited. So there's a lot of jobs, and you'll always find employers saying that the jobs are there, we can't find the right people. And then you have the right people like Shahida saying, well, we don't know where to get to those jobs. So it's a gap. I mean, just very simply put, it's a gap that seriously needs to be bridged to make everyone happy on both sides of the stream.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Manisha, for that. And in fact, this leads me to, I guess, the next question, Devashish, if, what Manisha pointed out is absolutely true, right? So there is a lack of industry involvement. This also seems to be a little bit of a policy black hole, this 14 to 18 age group, where the transition is being made, right? So how do you think the government has looked at this transition so far? Does this whole school to higher education, school to work larger transition at a systemic level, does it even sort of appear in the aspirational districts program or the smart cities agenda or any of the government agenda really?
So I think the conversation is, by the way, thank you so much for having me. And I think the conversation is going very nicely in a bottoms up approach. What Shahida has said is absolutely right, and what Manisha has said has built over it. And now I think the government explanation around what is happening is sort of an organic or evolution for that matter. So for instance, say 15 years ago, the problem was accessibility, and then the right to education came. When the right to education came and the government resources were sort of stretched a little too thin. We were running thin on the resources, but we tried to include everyone through a number of schemes within the formal education system. We did that, and after 5-7 years, we saw, oh no, the problem is now becoming learning outcomes. People are moving closer to the cities. That's the problem. Now, over the 5-6 years, I've been at ATI for the last 4 years, and I've been constantly hearing about learning outcomes from everyone who comes from ATIO and every discussion that is happening that is related to India's economic growth. So everyone now knows that it's about learning outcomes. So that problem is already sort of acknowledged. And if you look at the new education policy, it sort of addresses to that issue as well. So now we are trying to get ahead of this learning outcome issue. Now we are sort of organically moving towards this career awareness thing. And as you rightly said, there's a black hole around this 14 to 18 years of age group. Now I would say that what someone like I or Manisha or the government can do is something through formal institutions of governance and help people come into the system and be made employable. But I think we need a lot more about informal governance structures which sort of push people in or rather pull people in within this net. So I think that's already happening. It will happen because of 3 reasons. One is, once the growth keeps coming in, more and more people will be uplifted and they'll have awareness for that. First is that. The second is the democratization of the knowledge through social media platforms, through the badges, through the upgrades and stuff like that. I mean, people are already starting to learn coding now. Of course, that's only a small share of population, but over the years, this information will also be further democratized. It will become cheaper for people to access it and sort of explore it. And third is, I see more and more sort of informal institutions and the states and cities sort of stepping up to the game, because it's not about central government. Education is more of a state and a city or a cluster level issue from how I see it. And I think that's where the interventions have started to come in now, whether focusing on learning outcomes, whether employers around a certain cluster are focusing on, okay, this is my target population. I want to train them on these skills, and this is how I'm going to start these institutes. Like Tata's have been doing it for years now. Reliance has been doing it for years now. But more and more employers are now sort of getting into that space. And I think those are the 3 factors that will pull people up in terms of making them more employable right after school education. And this black hole will sort of, hopefully it should be a bridge soon.
Thank you, Devashish. Yeah. So Sarah, if I could bring you into the conversation now, right? So Manisha spoke about the need to make sure that industry is employed. Devashish spoke about how organically, we've sort of countries like India have moved from one issue, sorted that out, and then moved on to to the other issues. So what's really, is something like this still an issue in a developed nation like Canada, the school to higher education work transition? Is it still an issue at all? So what's the developed nation perspective? What are the issues and challenges that young adults face while making this transition in Canada?
It's quite interesting to hear Shahida say, to reference first generation learners. There's still quite a gap within formal education, really teaching that skill set of how do you take your skills and turn it into a career, and how do you understand what the future is going to look like for different careers so that you can prepare yourself. Because it is still quite a deep issue, and we're talking, especially within sort of first generation Canadians, more of our marginalized communities that typically sit at a lower percentage, but every time we don't bring this sort of education into formal spaces, it disproportionately disadvantages further, because it's sort of like this unspoken of skill set that people acquire through life experience or demonstration through their parents that came before them or the community they're a part of. It's a big push right now to open the conversation up into formal spaces for exactly that the effect is not felt equally across all of our communities in Canada. And so as if we look at the macro level, we're not going to meet industry needs unless we have a more inclusive approach to how we're bringing people into employment education. And I think, there's lots of like after school programs and there's lots of other sectoral support to teach those skills, but it's like, I'm sure Shahida, who's been through we've all been in education structures, that the more reinforcing messages you can get early on, because we're asking young people, they recently made a shift, particularly in the Toronto schools, of asking young people to choose a certain track of education early in high school, grade 8 or grade 9, without actually giving them the tools to make the informed choice as to what the consequences are of choosing one path or the other for a career choice that might come 6 or 7 years down the line. So it's a critical part of looking at, do we view education as a closed box of learning skills, or do we see education as preparation for how you're going to engage with the world later? And those critical skill sets, I think one of the things that's happening right now in Canada with COVID and with a social movement around anti-racism is looking at very critically who in society is benefiting from sort of the informal structures that have been set up, and how do we pull more people in for learnings that are so critical for success later. And Deloitte Canada just released their forecast for 2030 that looked at the number one skill needed for success is going to be lifelong learning, because economies are changing so quickly. And that by 2030, we're going to expect to have a worker shortage in key sectors. And so when I think of that 14 to 18-year-old age group, that's the age group that in 2030 should be filling those gaps. So without industry input and without pulling those pieces together, they're at a point where they're expected to make choices now, and the understanding of that needs to pull all those pieces together to be able to continue to keep the economy going.
Absolutely. And I think you sort of brought out a very relevant point, Sarah, right? This 14 to 18 age group, a decade down the line, is going to be the workforce over there. And we don't really know the skills that are going to be required. And therefore, this whole, focus on lifelong learning. But if you look at skills education, it's fairly short-term focus currently, serving the needs of industry today. And that's sort of the dilemma that the sector has also got caught in today. So, I mean, if you can again give us a little bit of insight into some of the solutions that have worked to address this challenge in Canada and through Mars, through the work that you do, that'll be great.
Yeah, so I think Manisha mentioned that not enough industry is brought into the idea of skills development and employability growth. So Opportunity for All Youth came out of the Mars Solutions Lab, which at the Mars Discovery District in Toronto is really looking at what are the systemic, how can we solve systems issues? So we're working with employers who really view it from, they have a lot of jobs that they can't fill right now. The government, who's funding employment services programs, a significant investment, and to know that they still can't find young people to fill those jobs. And the employment sector, who is pushing people through as fast as they can, and young people saying, well, we still can't find those jobs. That's indicative of where we would sit as conveners to say, how do we solve the problem together? And it does take a pretty special group of employers and who are willing to say, we're not just going to look at what we need, we're going to look at how do we, as one piece of a broader industry or multiple sectors, grapple with this issue of a huge amount of funding, and the results are not meeting us where we're at. And one thing that we've discovered through our work is that there's not enough young people, there's not enough youth involved in planning and designing and sitting in spaces where they can say, actually, I don't know these things, or I'm not up to speed on, what entry-level work is looking for right now. And so that's one thing from a solution space that we've started to push really heavily towards, is that whenever we're going to be in a space to design solutions, there have to be young people there. One, because if they're not going to use a system for whatever reason, if they're not accessing employment services, then that pipeline is not great for employers. If it's only going to reach 20% of the young people that are looking for jobs. For government, it's saying, is that the best investment to only look at that single pipeline, or should we be investing more in education systems and bringing it earlier into curriculums? And so for us, we sit at that very systems level space to try and get people out of a single perspective and say, where can we leverage different points of influence in the system? And so for us right now, it's very much around pulling young people into the process and allowing them to really talk about what the experience is, what the gap is, because there's a lot of people within the ecosystem that want to speak for young people. And quite frankly, we've all aged out of that experience, and it has changed drastically. We're looking right now with COVID, we've gone from an 8% NEET youth population, which is not in education, employment, or training, to 25% in a matter of 6 months. And so that lived experience has to inform how we change systems.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think in India, we're looking at close to a 40% post-COVID who are NEET, which is absolutely frightening. Yeah, thanks for that, Sarah. So, Devashish, if you can add your perspective on what are some of the solutions that you've seen working to solve this challenge.
Absolutely. So I think what Sarah said is something that is happening in India, but at a different with a different nuance, because it's a different sort of development trajectory here. But it's happening here as well, in the sense that we get a lot of partners, and it would be unfair for me to mention some names and not others, who are doing some really, really interesting work, who are focusing just on either districts or working with state governments. Niti Aayog had a partnership with state governments. We ensured that we do not only improve the learning outcomes, but also improve the employability of the children. That's happening. And then we kept on brainstorming with the NSDC as well. We got on some other partners, which were sector-specific NSDCs, where we try to ensure that, okay, if you're looking at this sort of skills and this sort of age brackets, that what sort of other partners could be brought in. Now, the trouble is that from the central level, you can do only as much. And that's where some of the states which have emerged as pioneers, and they should be recognized as much. Like, for instance, Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, they have done a phenomenal job. I mean, we usually associate these states with a high skill sort of job, but we should also understand, as Shahida also rightly mentioned, that because you have these first-time learners, first-time graduates, it's very important for them to have that exposure. And that's and we should recognize that people who are, say, suppose third-generation graduates or third-generation learners, they are moving into a different space, and So a new space is being created for the first learners and second learners, as well as they're also competing for the same space as the third generation learners. So when you recognize that, when states recognize that, they're able to provide that holistic sort of learning from 11 to 12. So if you look at what NV has tried to done, it has changed the schooling structure, which I think is very, very important and is going to unlock a lot of value. The government has placed a lot of emphasis on the apprentice program, because that brings the students directly in touch with the industry. So I think that is really, really important. The 14 to 18 age bracket is sort of also catered by NITI Aayog's Atal Innovation Mission, where we sort of set up those Atal Tinkering Labs. Of course, Atal Innovation Mission caters not to the entire universal of that age group, but it does attract to a certain age group where we can sort of spur innovation and they could become net job creators. I mean, we need to attack this problem from all levels and at all different sort of target groups that we can subdivide the problem into. So Atal Innovation does that as well. If you look at, we have some very interesting case studies out of the Aspirational Districts program, where the DMs have taken the lead, working with the state bureaucracy and the counterpart from the central bureaucracy, where they've identified that, okay, suppose my district is exporting this particular product, and I know that these are the skills that I would need. So that's how they've partnered with the nearby villages, with the peri-urban area schools, and they've tried to train the students who can get on the job training as well, and eventually the job there as well. There are institutions now in India. There's one in South, and I'm sort of refraining from mentioning organizations because I shouldn't be mentioning certain organizations. But what that basically a business does is that it runs a textile industry, and it has a lot of people who work and stay at the campus. What they've done is they've also started training and educating them for the last 10 years or something. So the people who are working there, who joined as, say, suppose a 10 pass or 11 pass or 12 pass, they get graduated while they are working, and then they move on to other jobs as well. So there are solutions coming from everywhere. It's about sort of absorbing them and scaling them. But at the same time, we should understand that the real solutions need to come from the cities, not even actually the states, from the cities and the clusters, essentially.
Right, and it's interesting that you talk about multiple solutions and not just one or two solutions that the government itself would scale up. And I think that's something to think about. And you mentioned the apprenticeship scheme, which we're hoping will become far more popular and
I think that's where the role of organizations such as yours come in the sense that it is possible, it is required of us to have this informal coalition of people who are, say, first generation and second generation learners, who really appreciate the value of, okay, how does it feel to come from a certain sort of challenges and still be able to deliver it, to have this coalition and speak to as many young people as possible. And young people are much more enterprising than we really think them to be, because we see a lot of AIM students coming to NITI Aayog. We have had a chance to interact with them. They're extremely, extremely enterprising, and we should sort of try and give them those opportunities. And it's just about having those single conversations with the young people. Once they know that these are the possible career opportunities, those people will figure a way out. One way or another, they don't need support from anyone, honestly. So far as their interests are safeguarded. I mean, and that's where the role of the government comes in, essentially.
True, that's true. And there are a couple of questions. I'm just mindful of time. So if I can direct the first question over here to you, Manisha, where Ravina has asked if we can bring in professionals from several areas into classrooms, then offering students just science and commerce approach. So you've supported a bunch of organizations that are doing multiple, fairly innovative solutions in this space. So if you can, talk to a question like this and talk about a solution at scale that's innovative and that's been engaging that you've seen.
So I think it's not so much about necessarily bringing in professionals, but from what I'm picking up from the source of Ravina's question is, how do you make the classroom an interesting place to learn and at the same time practical? We've seen programs which sort of have flipped learning being a very basic way where some of it is self-learning. This generation is particularly technology savvy, likes to do a lot of things on the phone, spends a lot of time on the phone. So how do we sort of leverage that to make it more exciting and interesting? And I can see Shahida nodding, so she totally gets what I'm saying. So that's one. I think there's people who've tried that. The other ways that people have tried is saying that even how do you make it more interactive? And a lot of the learning, and Sarah can sort of talk to that, is in the Western world is a lot more about preparing or self-learning and then coming back and sharing ideas and sort of evolving the thinking from that. So there's a lot of peer learning, which works a lot. But I think fundamental to the whole thing is, again, just underpinning Ravina's question is the change in the approach of transfer of knowledge from a teacher or a trainer to a student is where are you coming from? Are you coming from the perspective that both of you spoke about, Sarah and Priya, that this is really the workforce of tomorrow who we are addressing today? Or are you coming from, my job is just to get this kid to the next class, right? So I think it's that perspective that changes. Industrially, sort of professionals makes it very interesting. Sometimes it's not possible to structure that, but, sort of day in a life of a certain job, some of which, Priya, you're also working on. All of that makes it very interesting, but making it real, not theoretical for the young people. And I refrain from calling them kids because these are really young people who are at the brink of their career transition. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that is being experimented on. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much gone to scale yet. I'm hoping the national education policy gives an impetus to that for more of these innovations to come out, but nothing that's really gone to massive scale yet.
Absolutely. So there's another question from Dr. Dutt, and Shahida, maybe you can answer this. How does a first generation learner get the best guidance? So what's worked for you? You've been a first generation learner. You're at the cusp of a dream career. You've already started working in what seems to be something that you'd like to pursue. So how did you get the best guidance? We can't hear you, Shahida. You're on mute, I think.
Thank you. So what really helped me as being a first generation learner to figure out what next is really having a family which has been supportive in terms of allowing me to what to choose. Like if I want to pursue something and I think I'm a bit clear about it, my family has supported me to do. Secondly, what really helped out me as being a young person and first generation learner is that I did this extracurriculum activity like career-ready program. A program like this really helped me, to at least start thinking about what next. For me, my transition has not really been a thought-through transition. I started from science in junior college and then I ended up in IT. But right now, if you see what I'm doing is I'm really passionate in the social sector and working with data. So my transition has really not been a thought through, but yes, as Devashi said that we tend to figure out what next. And for me, I've been a lucky person that I figured out it very earlier, and I'm in a social sector. So these kind of things really help me.
Yeah, so I guess interventions at the right time, we're lucky that family support is a really big one. So I guess even organizations, schools, and the government, I guess, in this space, if we can encourage more parents and families to be part of it, right, is I think that's a really critical point. Sarah, if you can answer this question from Prabha. Adolescent children, how do they decide their future at this COVID time, during this time of COVID, and how can civil society support them?
Yeah, I think it's an exceptionally challenging time to make decisions. And one thing we have found, and I would be interested to know in the Indian context, one thing we found is that mental health is becoming a big challenge for young people who are either could not return to school because they lost out on their summer job because there wasn't a placement available, are sitting on an emergency benefit package from the government, or just working an essential job where they are faced with a health crisis every day when they go to work. And so those are the decisions that are sort of in the moment, what is driving them. And one thing we found across all of this, the civil service and the social service providers that we work with, is that they've shifted from how do we get people into a job into how do we build momentum for a post-COVID experience. So how do we keep people engaged and invested in their future when the day-to-day decisions are really quite overwhelming? And so a lot of like innovative approaches around grabbing into that digital space that young people are digital natives on, and basically organizations trying to catch up with the literacy that young people have there. And so we've seen a lot of uptake in different webinars and different online trainings, and even just support groups and conversation circles that you see across civil society. And I think what Manisha was talking about with scaling is it's happening in pockets because it's very reactionary of supporting young people like exactly where they're at in that moment. And scaling those initiatives is a big challenge we're grappling with, to say, how do we ensure that industry, where they might not be hiring right at the moment, can still be supportive of projecting what skills young people should be investing in, and even providing that expertise, like you mentioned about bringing professionals in. With some of the employers we work with who work in HR, and it's a difficult time for them. Like it's quite a emotional time when you have to let go of 60% of your workforce. We have all these HR professionals who are volunteering to coach people through skills or to mentor. And those things happen sort of in small pockets. But I think one of the key movements across most agencies right now is finding those skill sets that are going to be transferable anywhere, so that if you do have to make a pivot post-COVID, if you have to, if you're prepping for 3 or 4 career changes now, which I think is the norm with young people looking at their future, what are sort of like the 10 key skill sets that are going to allow you to transition easier? So that's become a bit of the shift in focus, is building, especially around identifying this time as being key to building resiliency, which will take you forward in so many different career spaces. But it is a really challenging time to say, make firm decisions and do, make those pivots now. One thing I've also seen is a shift towards a lot more training around self-management, with a view that a lot more jobs could be remote or could be working from home. That's not a skill set taught in schools. And all of a sudden schools have flipped entirely to digital learning, and you have kindergartners who are, in front of a Zoom screen. And so I think it will take time for it to integrate in, but that self-management skill set, I think, is part of what everybody's going to need to grapple with going forward.
So unfortunately, we've run out of time, even though we do have a few more questions there. So perhaps if I can quickly talk about the white paper that's there, which does answer some of these questions, and then come back for one question, perhaps one last question if we have time. So I have the pleasure of releasing a white paper that Adhyayan Foundation and Antarang together has authored, which really talks to what Sarah spoke about, what Manisha, Devashish, you also spoke about, and Shaida as well, right? How do you enable young adults to lead this journey to employability? How do you get industry as well as young adults participation in this transition of young people from education to employability? The white paper actually reviews several employability models, and it stresses on the need for young adults to lead their own transitions from education to employment. Do download it. It's there on the website, on the inspirED website. And this is a huge big thank you and a shout out to Adhyayan Foundation, Anushri, who's also there on this. they've co-authored, Adyan has been a partner with Antarang for quite a while now. They've co-authored this white paper as well. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, with so much going on in this online space, and Sarah, for you to wake up at this unearthly hour to join us. Truly, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I'm sure we'll have many more opportunities to continue with this conversation. It is an important conversation to have, to start, and to pay attention to. Thank you very much. Thanks, Shahida, for spending your time, and a huge thank you to all of the people who tuned in. With the huge number of options available online today, we do realize that everyone's time is precious. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone. We had 700 plus viewers for this panel discussion, and lots of questions were coming up. Thank you so much for your time. Yes, dear viewers, please stay tuned for the session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Welcome back, everyone, to the next session. We have a live masterclass right now. It's very, very engaging and it's going to be very interesting. It's called Understanding How to Create an Engaging Virtual Learning Experience by Professor Rohan Shekhar from Minerva Schools. So Professor Shekhar earned his PhD in Control Systems Engineering from the University of Cambridge, as well as a Bachelor of Engineering with first-class honors from the University of Queensland. He has experience in both small group techniques within the Cambridge supervision system and conventional lecturing at the University of Melbourne. As such, he fully endorses the bold path being forged by Minerva in enabling students to take ownership over the education through the use of state-of-the-art teaching technologies based on the science of learning. Welcome, Professor Rohan, to this session. And we have a wonderful set of fellows here. Welcome all of you to this session. Over to you for the next 45 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And hello, everyone. So I'm Professor Rohan Shekhar. I'm an associate professor at the Minerva Schools at KGI in the Department of Computational Sciences. And so really grateful to TFI for giving the opportunity to share some of our experience in creating engaging learning environments in a virtual setting. Joining us today is Jess Varghese, who is our Manager for Outreach in the South Asia region, and she's going to be assisting with the session. So first and foremost, I'll start the slide presentation, and then if you can all just indicate to me that you can see the slides with a thumbs up, that would be fantastic. So I'll just share my screen. And can you just show a thumbs up if you can see the screen? I'm going to start the slideshow as well, so hopefully you can see that too. Okay, excellent. So it looks like you can all see. Okay, so one thing at Minerva, and you've probably already heard a little bit about our background, we emphasize active learning and active participation. So in order to talk about or to facilitate a session on creating an engaging learning experience, we're going to require all of your active engagement in the session. And so that means that you may be called upon to contribute. And if you want to contribute, you want to add to the discussion, feel free to use your hand raise. So you can see that in the if you look at the participants list, you should see an option there for raising your hand. And also, when you're contributing, we may have to cut you off just given the time constraint we have. So don't feel offended if I have to stop you in the middle and then go to someone else, because we want to make sure everyone gets the opportunity to participate. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to kind of divide the session up into 4 parts. And so parts 1 to 3 are going to be the interactive part of this discussion. And are going to require your full engagement. And then we're going to debrief in the 4th part. And we're going to talk about some of the techniques we used in the session, which you may employ in your own classrooms. So we're going to kick this off with a poll. And so if I can get Jess to launch the poll, then we want you to answer some questions based on a reading you had for the session. So we want you to tell us, in your opinion, what do you think is important for creating an engaging learning experience out of these options we've listed here? And we'll give you maybe a couple of minutes to answer this poll. So okay, it looks like everyone has answered. Can you just indicate if you haven't answered with a thumb up so that I can see if you haven't answered the poll? I think everyone's done. So let's share these results. Can you all see the poll results now? Okay, so a lot of you answered all of the above, and that's the correct answer. Let's see if you can tell us why any of these are important based on the readings. Why don't we go to, I'm just seeing if I can see your names, which I can't at the moment. Let me see if there's a way for me to see everyone's names. Why don't we start with Vaibhav? Do you want to tell us?
Yeah, so thank you. So I selected all of the above just because scaffolded learning is important, as students should always start with the easy thing, and then they should try to go above what they are learning by increasing the rigor. And sorry, I don't have all of the options here, but interdisciplinary courseworks are also important because they can always we can relate learnings from interdisciplines with each other, and they can always build on it. And yeah, I can add this thing.
Yeah, that's a good answer. So yeah, all the reasons you mentioned are absolutely valid reasons. I do want to get one more contribution, but Jess, I'm not able to see anyone's name. I'm not sure if you can see the names of all the participants in the video, because I can't. You can? Okay. Maybe it's because I'm sharing my screen. So maybe Jess can call on someone to provide another answer to us, because I can't see the names.
Gayatri, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. I was just about to raise my hand as well. Thank you. So I think I have two solid reasons for saying all of the above. And I remember very clearly something that we read was learners learn best when the new information coming their way fits into what they already know. So prior knowledge is activated, which is why scaffolded coursework. And grading that provides quick feedback because as soon as a learner knows exactly what they need to do going ahead or where the gap is, I think like that just allows for quicker turnaround. Also, I remember something about just representing what they've learned. So synthesis basically as well. And I feel like that fits into one of these, but I'm not sure which one. So I do remember it.
Excellent. Yeah, another fantastic answer. So you'll find we're going to try and cover as many of these as we can in today's session. We do have limited time, but we'll see if we can touch on them. So yeah, good answers. It shows that you've already been thinking about these questions in your own classrooms. What we'll do now is we'll move on to the next activity. So this is going to be a breakout activity. But before we do that, we want you to, as you're listening to both of the activities in the session today, number 2 and 3 coming up, listen out for any 2 ideas you think you could adopt in your own classroom. So keep that in the back of your mind as you're listening to the discussions, and we'll ask you to share that with us at the end of the session. So listen out for any 2 ideas that were discussed today that you might want to use in your own classroom settings. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. I'm just going to end the poll here. So yeah, as I said, keep note of the 2 suggestions. Okay, now we've got a breakout activity, and this breakout activity is going to require you to answer some questions about the engagement in the classroom and how we can promote it, and strategies for assessment. There are a couple of other points there as well. What we're going to do is get you to go into breakout groups. There will be 2 breakout groups. Some of you will stay with me here in the main room. And in your group, once you get into the group, you should nominate a scribe to take down notes from the discussion in the group. And the points for discussion are these 3 points here. So those of you in the main room, we're going to be discussing what we can use to maintain engagement. Those of you going to breakout group 1, you want to talk about how you measure learning, because this is quite a challenging thing, especially in a virtual environment. How do you know your students are actually getting what you're teaching them? And then we've got another breakout group, which is going to talk about how you structure a plan for a lesson. So how do you plan out what you're going to teach? Don't restrict yourself to the online environment. Because of COVID, most of us have now had to move online. So feel free to talk about online, but don't restrict yourself to that. You can also talk about a classroom setting as well. Okay, I'll get Jess to start the breakouts, and then we'll have approximately 8 minutes in breakouts, and then we'll come back and share some of our findings. All right, let's go into breakouts. Okay, I think everyone's gone into their group now. Okay. So those of you who are left, we're in group 1. And so we're going to talk about what do we use to maintain engagement. So I like I said, I can't see your names, and I'm really not sure why. I can see your names when you speak, though. So why don't we get? Let me see if I can get a list of participants. Maybe we'll stop sharing.
When you click on view, you can get a gallery view.
Okay, I've stopped sharing the participants, so now we can see everyone. Stop sharing the screen. All right, why don't we go to Samriddhi to start us off with? So tell us about maintaining engagement. What are some strategies we could use?
Thank you, Professor. So what I feel like one of the criteria, one of the strategy that you can use to maintain engagement is constant acknowledgement of the responses that the kids give. Like they should really feel that whenever they're responding, whenever they're giving responses, irrespective whether the answer is correct or not, they should feel like we can give answers in the class, and that will enhance and that will improve engagement only if the teacher acknowledges every response. So it all depends on the hand of the teacher, how a teacher would react to that response. So the response could be incorrect, response could be correct, but how you're dealing in that situation, and if you're appreciating the responses consistently, not just in the opening or not just in the closing, but throughout the lesson, I feel like that could be one of the key tools. Others can add more.
Yeah, perfect. Maybe we'll get Vivek, if you don't mind writing these down, then we'll get you to share to the whole group when everybody comes back. So we had one excellent suggestion, which is about acknowledging every response, so every interaction from the student. And that's a great one. Saurabh, you want to tell us a little bit more? Carry on from that point.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So, am I audible? Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to add quickly, I just wanted to also bring in the point of, trying to just probably break the ice within the conversations that we have with students, right? Because taking classrooms regularly, also having a lot of interaction with them on a regular basis, what we don't generally tend to see is that, students have a lot of inhibition when they have to speak in front of, a virtual camera, for say. So probably, I think just breaking the ice, bringing in a lot of, acknowledgement, as Samriddhi had mentioned. At the same time, also, having a regular feedback system where we have assessments, right? We also bring in a lot of assessments, activities, and also, for instance, like just the way that we are doing, right? Maybe integrate using more breakout rooms, I would say, because, wherein we can also focus on smaller groups, because I believe, just handling a larger group, trying to get in a lot of information from the collective basis tends to be a little bit tedious. So probably working on smaller groups and getting a little more insight from students, maybe also involving in buddy activities is something that I've probably noticed works well. So that's my point.
Yeah, excellent point. Small groups. And that's one of the reasons why we're running a breakout here. So small groups work well. Why don't we go to Vivek? So tell us a little bit about how the small groups really help to enhance engagement. Why do you think students are more engaged when they're in a small group?
All right, so there can be two perspectives of that it's a smaller group, people tends to speak as much as they do not speak on a larger platform, because they feel like it's a safe space where 4 to 5 people are there and they can share their feelings or experiences, whereas there's the larger platform, the people with more confidence tend to speak much. So adding to what Saurabh and Samriddhi also said, that I would like to add, that for that also we need to engage them as much as we can through different mediums, not only like asking them questions, but like involving them in a lot of activities, like some games or some fun things where they can share their experiences. Yeah.
Excellent. Yes. So you made a very good point about dual coding, which is where we use multiple media to engage the students, right? So this is important, not just in groups, but also when you're together as a class. And why do you think that might be? We'll go back to Samriddhi. Why do you think it might be that if you have multiple media, students are more engaged than just, say, a teacher talking and maybe just writing something on a board?
Yeah. So thank you for the question. So what I feel is like if you are going to limit the entire discussion on the basis of just teacher talking, you wouldn't actually get the learning outcome from the students. So you really need to get the students discuss their own perspectives. And the surprising thing and the most fascinating thing is that their answers can vary, can vary so much, and that has so much quality. So I think discussion, debating, respecting each other's opinion, I think that creates collaboration, that creates a sense of learning together, like learning it together. And that is only possible if they are discussing and they're having a space to discuss among themselves and not just the teacher talking. Because the students would definitely get bored and they wouldn't realize that what potential they have within themselves unless or until they're not given a chance to. So just giving them that space where they can contribute to a discussion, just like what we are doing right now. So I feel like it's extremely of paramount importance that kids get to discuss. Yeah. I hope that
Absolutely.
answers the question.
It does. And it goes back to your point about making each student feel valued and making their contribution feel valued, right? Which is obviously much easier in a small group setting than it is in large groups. So, to make sure each student gets a chance to shine, it's often very useful to have them broken into smaller groups where they have that opportunity. And then as a class, it's not maybe so important if some students, because of time, don't get the chance to contribute because they've had the opportunity in the small group to be heard. Now, one of the important things is also not just to let students off on their own to discuss, but also to have a teacher or a professor actually moving around the groups. Why do we think that helps with the discussion? Why don't we go to Vivek again? Vivek, why do you think it helps if you have like a teacher kind of just circulating around the groups, shall we say, while the students are working?
Yeah, so it helps the children to be on track. So they did not get deviated from the topic they are discussing on, or they are not like be silent throughout the period of time. We are not looking into them. So that's why circulating around the groups and looking what they are doing and bringing them back on track is essential part of the discussions or the small groups which we have. Yeah, excellent point. So we need having groups doesn't mean that the teacher can sit back and let the groups just work on their own. In fact, more involvement is required, right? It means that you have to be actively going to each group and seeing what it is that they're doing. Are they getting the point? If they're off track, you need to very quickly push them back onto the right track of the discussion, right? And also to make sure quieter students are being heard, because in a group, it is possible for some students to completely dominate the discussion. So you do need to be actively checking and making sure those quieter students are actually contributing. So I think we're getting to the end of our breakouts. Okay, great. So what is our main takeaway, do you think, from the discussion we just had here? Vivek's going to be the scribe, but I'll get Saurabh to debrief us. What do you think were some of the points?
Sure. Thank you so much, Rohan. So I think just, probably summarize, I would say, in the end, just fostering a community, right? Because at the end of the day, we are probably interacting with students in a virtual environment on a regular basis as of now, trying to integrate blended learning. So fostering a community, trying to understand, what their problems are, delving deeper into, the challenges that we face as well as the students face. So probably understanding, on a deeper level, trying to make, I would say, virtual learning a little more interactive, because I think that's a very, very big challenge. And at the same time, I think, also to add to the point, I would say using a lot of inflections, right? That's something that also the educator or the teacher needs to do. Having dramatic pauses, trying to say what he wants to implement at single intervals is going to be a very big challenge. So if that is, working on a regular basis, then probably it might, enhance the situation.
Yep, excellent. Okay, looks like everyone is making their way back. Are we missing anyone, or has everyone managed to find their way back in the breakout room? Looks like everyone is here. Okay, so let's get some sharing from the different groups. I think Vivek was nominated as the scribe for group 1, and we were looking at this question of engagement. So Vivek, do you want to tell us about what the main findings were from our discussion?
Yeah, so as we discussed in our group, and we came up a lot of similar points we were talking about to take a lot of response from the children, hearing them and letting the student to give feedbacks and involving them such activity where each and every child can participate. Talking about the breakout room discussions also, we came up with the point that where we have to take a look on the children, what they are doing, because we have to ensure that all the children are participating and they are on track and listening to what other people are sharing. It gives also space to show their perspective, because in a larger platform where all the 30 to 40 children are present, they're not able to showcase what they are having inside their mind. So breakout room discussion are very important as a part to maintain engagement of the children. Apart from that, multiple media, we came up with the idea that multiple media platforms are needed to be used to have maximum participation of the children. Yeah.
Excellent points, Vivek. So the engagement topic is something that's going to run constantly through the rest of the session. So we're going to come back to this. Why don't we go to breakout group 1? Who was the scribe for breakout group 1? If you can share. This was the question of measuring the learning of the students.
That was me. So Aman, Ananya, and I, and for a little bit Jess also, we discussed how to measure, like what is the best way in this current context also to measure learning. We deep dived a little bit into measuring learning during a learning experience. And so checking for understanding throughout a learning experience is what we mostly spoke about. And I think the key things that came up were, like, some were just tools that are helping us right now, like Google Classroom or like yes, no, CFUs in checks for understanding during the session, etc. Or scaffolding even the questions that we ask. Some other bigger buckets that came up were just, as a teacher, are we being really strategic about all the data that we collect and the measuring of learning that we do? Because there is so much to constantly observe and take in. And some of it we might not even need. So are we being strategic about exactly what we are gathering and using to inform our instruction? And how do we make sure our students know the purpose of why we're measuring, why we're asking them questions, why we're checking their understanding, so that they don't influence each other's answers, so that they're also okay with making mistakes. That's just where we paused.
Yeah, excellent points, all of them. And especially, you made a point of using technology. This is going to be the next topic we're going to look at very briefly. That's what we're going to show, is that technology is really something that can make a huge difference to your ability to assess how well students are learning, and also to get them engaged. It has kind of this dual benefit. Let's wrap this up with the second breakout group, which was the topic of structuring lesson plans. So who wants to share on that?
Yeah, I'll take that. So Mitali and I were essentially sharing the context of a classroom. It's very similar. So we agreed on pretty much some like very core points. Whenever we were thinking of designing a lesson plan in the physical space, we try to incorporate a lot of things which obviously get limited in a virtual space. But some of the things that have worked for both of us in our classrooms have been incorporating art in our lesson plans. I think just in terms of building engagement and ensuring that the kids are interacting with us as we go along, and it's not very information heavy. We try and incorporate art and bring some elements of creativity into the picture. Also, another huge part of it is creating spaces for them to interact with each other and also build that sort of healthy competitiveness amongst them by giving in them challenges and some sparks to think about. So just pausing in between our lesson plans to ensure that the kids are processing and synthesizing everything that's going their way, and they're also getting the time to verbally interact with one another to just make that learning more concrete. And I think just like to wrap it up, in the present status with the virtual setup with virtual learning going on, I think we've both realized that most of the learning takes place in these kind of synchronous spaces where as much as communication is possible. In an asynchronous space, especially with first generation learners, it's very difficult to achieve that kind of engagement and that kind of like check on whether the learning is happening, because there are very few monitoring mechanisms in place. So these are the few things that came out in the conversation in breakout room too.
Yeah, all of them excellent points. And I like how you brought together the fact that the structure of the lesson goes hand in hand with engagement and goes hand in hand with the student outcomes. So that's how you assess the learning. So all these three are related together. You can't really separate them. And that's a very good takeaway from the discussion we've just had. Okay, I'm going to share my screen once again, and we're going to just briefly look at this aspect of technology. Because of COVID now, many of us are having to transition to online teaching. So this is something we've actually been doing at Minerva for quite a while. We're completely online. All of our teaching happens online, so we're used to this, but many of you would not have had the experience before. So we want to touch on, I'll just go to the second slide here. So we're just going to get a few points. We've only got a couple of minutes. So we want to know about technological tools. What technological tools have you used so far in your online teaching? Can I get you to just put in chat what some of those tools are that you've used? Okay, so we're seeing quite a few of the popular tools here. The Google Suite, of course, very popular, not because it's free, and it has a lot of very effective tools. I see someone's mentioned Jamboard as well, which is another fantastic innovation. To be able to have a whiteboard on a virtual class is great. Okay, so we've got a very good selection of tools here. Zoom, of course, Microsoft Whiteboard. What I want to do now is to maybe just go through a couple of contributions from you on what challenges you've had using technology in the classroom. What has it changed, or what has it made more difficult compared to being in the actual classroom setting? Why don't we get Ananya to share with us?
Thank you so much for calling on me. I can talk about this. I can talk about this particular question for a while. One of them is definitely something I shared in my breakout room as well, is that I'm having difficulty gauging understanding. And it's easier when I have responsive students who are comfortable using the platforms, but I also have a lot of students who are not as comfortable using the platforms. I use Google Meet mostly and Google Classroom. So I have some students who are still struggling to use these. And so their response is a little less, and I'm not always able to gauge their level of understanding. Even with CFUs, I struggle to see how much of it has really been understood. Another thing that definitely is just the quality of network. Even if I want to send a Loom video across, even if I want to share my screen, a lot of times it just doesn't load for them, and it just doesn't work for them. A lot of students have had their access restricted to their phones. So when I send a YouTube video across, they're like, I can't watch it because my network is just not, it doesn't load. So even if I want to share screen, then I can't do that. So right now, I have two alternatives for every single asynchronous option I have. I have to have a YouTube video, but I also have to have a pictures that I can send across. So yeah, these are just some of the problems that I've been facing.
Okay, very, very good points. And the onboarding process can be very difficult, especially getting students up to speed with using the technology, and not to mention the technical issues that happen with the platforms. You've covered a number of the problems that we can face. I also want to get a contribution if we can. So I'm just seeing who else has put in chat. Mitali, do you want to tell us about your issues with?
Sure. I have two major challenges with using technology. One is the availability of device, daily data limits, and they don't have their devices for a long duration of time. So they don't get to explore a lot of tools and using multiple devices. The second major is the login-based tools that they have. They find it really complicated. First, they didn't have email IDs. They are sixth grade kids. They didn't have email IDs and all. Though we tried to get them on board with email IDs and getting them logged in, but they find it really complicated to comprehend all of those things and then using that technology. So these are the major two challenges that I have with using tools, and that is very limited. Any tool which uses a lot of data is just out of my scope. I can't use it. So yeah, majorly those. Thank you.
Great. And I mean, these are important challenges particular to the Indian context as well, right? Where we have students who may have very poor internet access, and it really affects their ability to participate in any online activities. And so this is something that it has no easy answers to this in the short term, but it's certainly something that needs to be considered when we're looking at developing infrastructure to allow online learning. I want to touch on one last point here, which is what we think about the use of technology to promote learning. Sure, it has difficulties, but it also has a lot of benefits that actually make it, in fact, better for learning than a real classroom environment. Let's get an opinion on this. I don't know if Bala is just listening or if she wants to contribute. Bala, can you hear us? maybe she's just listening.
She's running the track, so I think we'll just have to call someone else.
Okay, fine. Why don't we go to, let me see, who hasn't had a talk for Sauram. Tell us about how technology helps with learning.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rohan. So I think, as we had already mentioned, the challenges that we face, right? We're also trying to use many different type of technological tools to probably, improve the efficacy of the depth of understanding of the concepts. That's precisely what I've been trying to do, integrate into my curriculum. I've also tried to use different kinds of apps, which students might not be able to, let's say, even if there's a problem wherein they're not able to, access data, or if there is an issue with regard to just trying to, open packets. There are also alternatives wherein, they could probably collaborate with a few of the other students in the classroom and then go ahead and learn. So I think it's not only about the challenges that we are seeing, it also helps a lot with trying to bring in the collaboration among students, if there are inadvertent situations. So I feel that that's something that we need to focus on here to probably improve the fact that when you already have a virtual environment, there are scenarios wherein the tools can probably help them to improve on the depth of understanding as well. So that's what I would like to say.
Yeah, excellent point. And this is, again, something we'll discuss in the debrief, is how technology can be a real positive force, provided we can overcome some of these obstacles that we've mentioned. So we've looked a little bit at engagement. We've looked at structuring the lessons, getting active participation, and we've also looked at technology and how these kind of go together. Let's kind of round this out with a reflection on what we've discussed in this short session. And so we asked you at the start to think about 2 things that you might take away from the discussion we've had and implement in your own classroom. So if I can get you to tell us here about those 2 takeaways, and just put your takeaways in chat, and then we'll get 1 or 2 of you to share with us. And these points are going to be different for all of you because you're all teaching in slightly different contexts. So we want to get your kind of wealth of different perspectives to see what you think you could use in your particular classroom situation. Okay, we maybe have another minute or so. So if you can, just a quick summary of 2 things you might take away. Okay, has everyone got their answers in? Is anyone still going? Okay, looks like everyone has got their answers, which is great. Why don't we go to Gayatri? Can you share the couple of takeaways you had from the session?
Definitely, I'd love to. I think what I've written here is just how something that got reiterated for me during this session was how engagement, measuring learning, and the design of that learning experience cannot be looked at in isolation, right? So I can't say I'll design my content, then I will design how I want to measure my outcomes, and then I will design what's the fun element or what will make this really engaging. It's all integrated. That's the one thing that got just reiterated. And the second thing is technology can be a really good thing. I think I personally need to stop looking at it also as the enemy right now, because like if we use it well, it can take us to really good places. So yeah. Excellent
takeaways. And all of you have had some good takeaways. But so we are out of time for this part of the interactive part of the session. So thank you all for your contributions and great active participation. Now when we go to the debrief, we want you to think about how we ran this session today, because a lot of the techniques that we use for engagement are what we just used now in running this session. So a bit of metacognition about the process of running this short session that we had today. Let's have a look at some of the points. Now, this is a really important one, and a lot of you touched upon this when you were saying about making sure that students feel that they're in a safe environment to be able to contribute to class, right? So this is really important. There needs to be a very strong culture of acceptance that any response is okay, engagement is encouraged, right? There are no stupid answers to any questions. Students shouldn't feel that if I say the wrong answer, then it's going to look bad, or I'm going to suffer some penalty in terms of my assessment for the course. They should feel free to express themselves, and the only way they learn is by expressing the difficulties they have. And so that culture is very important. So when you're setting up your learning community, whether it be online or in person, you need to make sure that you do emphasize you are all a team and there's no competition. You're working together to learn, and your learning outcomes together as a group can be much greater than if you're all kind of working for your own learning, right, individually and seeing it as a competition, which it's not. And one of the important things here is calling on students using their names. So you notice that I called upon all of you to make a contribution today, some of you more than once where there was time. And this is really important because it makes the student feel valued. And I think in our breakout group 1, this was mentioned about making the student as an individual feel valued, that their contribution really matters. And so it's important for teachers to similarly make sure that they know all of the students' names and they know to call on the student by name, and the student feels recognized by the teacher. That's critical. And this is easier in an online learning environment where you can see everyone's names, although I couldn't see all of your names today until I managed to get it in chat. But this is something that helps greatly in making sure students feel valued, students feel like they're part of the class and they're not being ignored or overlooked. Assigning roles is also very important. So to have active learning, you really need the students to be doing something. And this means that you want to assign students to, for example, take notes. You want to assign students to maybe monitor responses, or you can tell a student, I want you to respond to the next point that's going to be made by this other student. So you're getting them listening and saying, I need you to listen out for this, get ready to be involved. And so you saw we did that today with the breakouts. We had a scribe, we had somebody responsible for taking notes and then sharing the findings. And that can really help to create this sense of community, giving students roles and obviously making sure all students have the opportunity to undertake those roles at various points throughout the academic calendar, right? So that's very important. The final point we have here is using activities to ask students to apply concepts in a collaborative sense. So small group work was our example here in today's session of getting you to be able to talk in a setting which is much easier to have conversations than a huge classroom, right? When you're in a group with 2 or 3 people, it's much easier to have a depth of conversation, a depth of engagement that you can't in the large classroom. So having students work in groups is really an important aspect of active learning. Debates, so that means that call on a student to contribute and then get another student to respond to that. And then maybe you get a third student to respond to those 2. And that way you're encouraging discussion amongst the class rather than just making it all about me as a teacher, right? I know everything and I'm just going to somehow transfer all my knowledge to you. It works much better when the students are actively engaging with the material. Okay, so let's go to this second slide as well. Which is about focus of the students. Making sure the students have a task is very important because it's very easy to sit back and just not listen. And so you would have noticed one thing we asked you to listen out for today was 2 things that you would want to take away. And that's called an engagement prompt. So we told you something to listen to that we want you to think about, so you can't tune out during the discussion because you're going to be asked to answer this question at the end. So having something that students who are not contributing listen out for and then contribute is a great way to maintain engagement in the classroom. Varying the activities obviously goes without saying. We had some polls here to be able to assess your grasp of the readings, the small group work, and then we had a large group discussion. So different kinds of activities help maintain student interest. Building in moments of closure. This is really important. So you'd notice at the end of each discussion, I got a couple of you to summarize what the findings were from the discussion. And then I also added any insight where it was applicable. Capping off an activity and giving students some sense that they know this is the main takeaway is absolutely essential. So students do need to know what the takeaway is from each activity you have in class. And you only move on to the next activity once you're sure that they've all had a chance to get that takeaway from the activity. The last point here is giving students time to reflect. So this was another purpose of getting you to talk about what your takeaways were, is to get you to reflect on the whole session and then put that into chat. This is a really important way to keep engagement and help encourage student participation. We've got another point here, which is about using interactive resources. So you could see here that we use slides, which are have some color schemes in them so that students are kind of engaged with the material. You want to try and use multimedia wherever possible. Videos are great in an online setting if you can use them. Let's also look at this point about collaborative tools. So Google Docs, for example, is great to have students all log into one collaborative document where they can type in their ideas when they're working in breakout groups, for example. Collaborative work online like that is really important. And encouraging comments in chat. Now, this is really important as well because chat is a forum for students to express their views without necessarily needing to speak in class. So not every student may have the opportunity to actually speak their thoughts out loud, but they can still contribute to the discussion by putting their thoughts in chat. And this is a really great way for a teacher to look at the chat and say, actually, this student has made a really good observation. Let's call on them to answer a question, or let's call on them to explain their viewpoint on this particular topic. So have the chat stream going at the same time as you're having the main class going with discussions or other activities. It really helps to get students engaged. Okay, now the bugbear of technology, and this is something just the two of you that expressed your issues with technology would have. I'm sure all of you have actually experienced the issues. Get everyone accustomed to the tools. So the students need to be properly onboarded. They need to know what the tools are. They need to know how to use them. You don't want to spend half your semester trying to get students up to speed on the tools. The other point is you want to avoid troubleshooting in real time. If there are problems with technology, we want them to take a back seat, right? So I mentioned a little bit about the issue I had seeing your names in chat, but I didn't carry that on. You don't want to carry on about technology. Students lose faith in the technology, then they lose engagement. So try as much as possible to deal with technological issues quickly without bringing too much attention to them, if you can. Obviously encourage students to silence phones, etc., to avoid distractions. That's true in a classroom. Encourage students to keep videos on as well, because if you can see their face and they can see your faces, it feels much more like they're interacting with real people rather than just hearing voices. And last is a practical one. If at all possible, students should use an Ethernet connection so that they have a reliable internet connection where that's possible. So we did hear a couple of issues from a couple of you mentioning bad internet connections can really ruin the experience. So having students making sure they have a good connection is really vital. Okay, I'm going to wrap up here. And thank you all for being such great active participants. I'm going to hand over to Jess just to say a couple of words on those of you who might be interested in knowing more about how we adopt these strategies at Minerva and want to continue the conversation, you can reach out to us. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you, Rohan, and thank you, fellows, for such a great session. So a lot of the techniques we spoke about today in the masterclass are implemented in Minerva's classrooms, and all of this is based on our learnings from the past 5 years using our own proprietary technology platform called the Forum, which puts in place all the learnings we experience today in the masterclass. We also offer various programs for high schoolers, undergraduates, and graduates. If you are interested in knowing more about either of the programs and would want to partner or collaborate with us, please reach out to us via the email listed on the slide. Or you can also contact us using our contact information on the feedback form of the session, which will be shared by the Teach for India team. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you had a wonderful time.
Thank you so much, Jess, and thank you so much, Rohan, for here. And the fellows, thank you for taking your time out for this session. Even the chat, there are lots of questions coming up. They were also actually answering when you were asking this group. So the question that you had asked, that we could see response on the chat box. It was wonderful to see that. Dear participants or dear viewers, please stay tuned for the next.
Hey everyone, this is Muskan and I am a spoken word poet, and I'd like to encourage all of you to come and be a part of a very special conference called inspirED, where educators and influencers from different countries will come and talk about education and its policies. So don't miss this opportunity. It's fully free and you will even get a certificate for this. Make sure you're signing up for it, and I hope you have a great experience. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I just wanted to tell you about this very amazing conference called inspirED. It's a great opportunity for everybody to come and know different perspective on what people think about education as reality and their life experience. It's a great opportunity and I would love all of you to come, see and learn from each other. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We have the next session right now. It's Leadership Online, the Avsara Academy with Joseph Cubas. Joseph is the co-founder and current head of school at Avsara Academy. Before joining Avsara, he was at the American School of Bombay. As director of institutional advancement, he worked with the head of school to facilitate the work of the board of trustees. Joseph, we welcome you to this session. Over to you for the next 15 minutes.
Everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us. My name is Joseph Cubas. I am the co-founder and current head of school at Avsara Academy. Avsara is an all-girls secondary school working with students from low-income backgrounds. Through 7 years of deep, meaningful engagement, our hope is that students leave Avsara to become part of the next generation of women leaders across the country in every sector of society. Now, it goes without saying that the pandemic and this period of extended school closure has significantly impacted not only the ways we work, but the ways we think about our work. And so, over the next 15 minutes or so, I will be sharing 8 lessons learned so far in my re-education as a school leader during the pandemic. The first lesson learned in my re-education is about reflection. Now, it's hard to find time to step back and reflect in the best of circumstances. And these times characterized by uncertainty, disruptive change, threat, both visible and invisible, separation, loneliness, fear, anxiety, and stress, make it particularly difficult to make time to step back and reflect on the actions we have taken and the decisions we have made. But if we're going to learn from this experience, if we're going to grow from this experience, if we're going to transform, we have to step back. We have to make the time to process what we have done, to monitor and process what we are doing, and to name and surface all the emotions that have come along with this experience. This reflection will enable us to bring our insights with us to the next meeting, the next decision, and certainly the next normal. So I humbly offer these reflections on leading and serving during this pandemic. It would be uncharacteristically bold of me to refer to these reflections as insights. Instead, I encourage you to think of them as musings from a brother in arms, a thought partner, and an eager student who is rediscovering what it means to lead. I hope they prove useful to you on your continued journey. The next lesson in my re-education is around gratitude. Never has the need to express gratitude been clearer to me than during this pandemic and period of extended school closure. When I think about all that has had to happen to bring Avsara to where we are today, I'm truly, truly humbled. I am grateful for everyone that has worked at Avsara, for everyone that has supported us, that has advocated for us, and that has connected with us and to us. This extended Avsara community has not only helped bring a dream to life, but it has helped prepare us and the students we serve for these extraordinary times. I am especially grateful for the patience grace, compassion, doggedness, energy, empathy, honesty, vulnerability, and commitment of the team currently walking this journey at Upsera with me. No one signed up to work in this way. No one could have predicted that it would extend for this long. And yet, everyone on the team has remained very much committed to our students. I deeply appreciate everything they have done and continue to do to keep the Upsera dream alive. Please always remember to never miss an opportunity to say thank you. The next lesson in my re-education is about having an action orientation. In times of crisis, stasis is our enemy. We have to make a move. Now, I completely recognize and understand that with so much uncertainty, it's really hard to know what to think and what to do, especially when change comes suddenly and our existing infrastructure and ways of working are not at all set up to deal with the kind of change that just hit us. Nevertheless, we cannot freeze, right? Now, it's important to note that movement isn't always decision-making. Movement does not have to be sweeping systemic changes, right? Movement can be reaffirming our beliefs. Movement can be reaffirming our values. Movement can be reaffirming our mission, right? Movement can be further research and information gathering. It can be making spaces for dialogue and expression. Learning, growing, asking questions, seeking advice, listening, and planning are all ways of moving. Given your context and given your tribe, your people, the work is figuring out the right move and then to make it. The next lesson in my re-education is about the speed of our movements. The key words here are can be. Moving fast is not always bad or wrong, but sometimes, moving too fast can undercut our good intentions. Now, our journey to remote learning was a little different than most. With the first COVID cases being reported in Pune around March 10th, we extended our post-exam holiday by 2 weeks on March 12th. During this period of, say, proactive school closure, we distributed paper learning packets to students. When the nationwide lockdown was announced on March 24th, we remained committed to doing everything we could to continue learning for our students. And by March 31st, students were signing up to a virtual learning platform. But now I don't regret moving, right? My previous lesson learned was all about movement. But I do sometimes wonder if we moved a little too fast. When I think back to all the clarifications we had to make, all the trainings and retrainings we had to do, and when I think about the things we have learned to live with in terms of the learning management system we chose, I wonder what would be different if we took 1 or 2 or 3 more days to debate and discuss before we started emergency remote teaching online. Now, the point here is not to dwell on the past. It's to remember that as we move forward, in many cases, we can slow things down and take the time we need to think, to research, to plan, to discuss, to decide. Otherwise, we run the risk of our good intentions being diminished or even negated. Lesson number 5 in my re-education is about the single most prevalent characteristic of our time: uncertainty. Uncertainty is stressful. Our brains are wired for habitual behavior. and find comfort in predictability, right? If you're anything like me, there have been many moments over the last 6 months where you felt that so much was outside of your control. And it's unsettling. Uncertainty is unsettling. It's unnerving. And in many ways, it's exhausting and discouraging. One of the most helpful things we can do for our own mental health and well-being, as well as the mental health and well-being of the people we serve, is making certain what we can as soon as we can. When COVID reached Pune, we made it clear that we would close school until we better understood how it might be spreading. When the lockdown was announced, we made it clear that we would continue teaching and learning online. When circumstances impacted families' abilities to secure essential needs, we made it clear how we could help. When the unlock began and devices became less available to students because their parents went back to work, we made clear our plans to procure and provide devices for the students most in need. And even though the date for schools reopening remains elusive, we are sharing our reopening plans with staff. Each of us has waded through this pandemic, making the best decisions we could with the information at hand. Even in the most uncertain times, there are things within our control, and there are some very intelligent bets we can make that will reduce or remove stress and tension from the system. We need to make those calls and communicate them wherever and whenever possible. The next lesson in my re-education is about energy, right? So it goes without saying that teaching and learning from home is intense, cognitively, physically, and emotionally. Add to this a whole new set of tasks and obligations at home that demand our time and attention, and you have a potent recipe for fatigue and exhaustion. We simply cannot be always on all the time. We have to think about how we can build in structures and routines to help avoid overwhelming our teams and systems and to minimize exhaustion and fatigue. One of the few things that we have done to help manage energy was to institute a pause system. So once in 4 to 5 weeks, we release fewer lessons and we relax expectations on communication among staff and between staff and students. These for a period of 3 to 4 days. These pauses offer a brief departure from the always-on nature of teaching and learning from home. Of course, emergencies always have to be attended to. And, perhaps a pause system may not be possible in your context. But please take some time to think about structures or routines you can build in that provide time for you, yes, you, your teams, and your students to rest and rejuvenate. The seventh lesson in my re-education is around managing complexity. Recently we found ourselves in a conversation that I'm sure many of us have been having. A small team was thinking through and planning for students' return to campus. This is truly a wicked problem. For us, we have students coming from some of the areas in Pune that are most affected by COVID. All of our students have to come by bus. We have students in grades 10, 11, and 12 with different subject combinations. We have different subjects assigned to different classrooms on campus, which have specific resources, subject-specific resources housed in those classrooms that students might have to move between. And we have all of the community spread precautions to factor into the solution of this equation. Now, so this is one of many wicked problems that need solutions, right? How do we know students are really learning virtually? How do we help students stay motivated to do schoolwork at a distance? How can we help students maintain the healthy social aspects of school virtually? And the list can go on. When everything in a problem is so interdependent, we have to be aware of those connections while stripping down the problem to its most essential components so that we can build solutions from the ground up, one decision at a time. And the final lesson learned so far in this journey is about empathy, active listening, and fellowship. Now, I have phrased this slide from my perspective, right? But you could very easily substitute leader with teacher, advisor, mentor, any other role you may play, or quite simply, human being. We all have had our ups and downs over the last 6 months. We have cried, we have screamed, we have been numb and without feeling. We have vented, we have asked questions, we have sought advice, and we have shared our intellect and insight with others. Our relationships with the people we work with and the students we serve are rich and deep and complex. And because of this, we have to play different roles at different times. And so when someone emails us or calls us or approaches us, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of leader, teacher, advisor, mentor, father, mother, sister, brother, does this person need me to be for them right now with all of the humility, empathy, and compassion we can? So, in summary, reflect whenever you can. Never miss an opportunity to say thank you. Move, reaffirm, recommit, think, plan, talk, make spaces, decide, but move. But control the speed of your movements so that they don't undercut the good intentions that you have. Uncertainty is unsettling. Reduce it as much as you can. Build systems and routines to help manage energy. Break down complex problems and build solutions up one decision at a time. And try to be the type of person that the person in front of you needs you to be in that moment. Thank you. Hopefully these reflections will help you continue to build back better in the weeks and months ahead.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for that. It was just wonderful to listen to your learning amongst this pandemic and how you have managed to overcome that. You could also see in the chat box how people were responding to how they somehow managed to overcome this challenge, their learnings. Thank you so much for that. Dear viewers, we have the next session, LGBTQ Inclusive Education by Parmesh Hani. He's a vice president at Godrej Industries Limited and the founder of Godrej India Culture Lab. He's a passionate advocate for LGBTQ inclusion in corporate India and has guided many of the country's leading companies on their inclusion journeys. His first book, Gay Bombay Globalization, Love and Belonging in Contemporary India, was released in 2008 and re-released in June 2020 as an updated edition. And his second book, Queeristan, LGBTQ Inclusion in the Indian Workplace, was released in August 2020. Welcome, Parmesh, to this session. Over to you for the next 20 minutes.
Hi everyone at Teach for India. This is Parmesh and I'm so happy to be talking to all of you. I know it's evening, it's almost the end of the day and I'm going to try very, very hard not to bore you. Gauri happens to be one of the incredible individuals who are featured in my book. Queeristan, LGBTQ inclusion in the Indian workplace. And I really wanted this book to be very much about people and our stories, right? Because it's ostensibly a business book, it's ostensibly a how-to book, but I felt that you can't do a how-to book without telling people about who these stories are and why this inclusion is important. And which is why I'm so happy to be taking this session for all of you, because I kind of want to share some thoughts around effective communication that I've tried to do with this book. And I'm going to show you a bunch of videos as well that I believe are also very, very useful as effective communication tools. And I hope that you find it useful in your practice as well. Yeah. So, to me, communication is effective when it's completely based on what outcomes you intend. So effective communication is communication that is outcome oriented, and you have to design whatever communication intervention you're working on, whether it's a lecture, whether it's a video, whether it's a book, whether it's a social media post, whatever it is, thinking very much about the outcomes. So in this book, for example, the outcome was very much, I wanted it to be a call for action. I wanted people to be reading it, to immediately go and make their own organizations inclusive. So the way I designed it in every aspect was, how can each part of the book be a call for action, right? So I designed the book to have 5 sections, very strategically. In the first section, I wrote about my own personal journey and my journey at Godrej, which is where I've been working for the past 10 years. And again, I did that very strategically because often, in these how-to books, we aren't really emotionally invested. And I really, really wanted people to be emotionally invested in the book from the moment they enter into it. I wanted them to care. I wanted them to connect to my own life, to go on this journey with me. And also through, this one story of one company, because later on in the book, there are so many other case studies, but I really wanted to care about, me and this journey. And so it starts with a very, very personal, it's like you're kind of just immersed into my life. You go into my childhood, you understand where I came from, and, you draw that connection with the reader. Then in the second part of the book, I actually give a background. So I draw back and I talk about the context. Again, this is also deeply personal because, the book is about LGBTQ inclusive at the workplace. And I've assumed that my reader would be someone in business, someone working at an institution, and many of them might be straight. So why should they care? So, again, designed to give the context, right? So I think of the context in these different ways. I think of it in terms of the law, whether it's 377 or other laws, in terms of the various terms that we use in the LGBTQ community, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and so many other terms, hijra, kothi, aravani, so many others as well, to explain what these terms mean, the history, to give the readers a sense that being queer has always been a part of Indian culture. And in fact, what is not Indian is homophobia, which came in with the British, and then the British left about 70 years ago, and finally their archaic section 377 also went in 2018. So it's time for homophobia to go back. And then, which is actually my favorite chapter, and it's a chapter called "It's All About Loving Your Children." And it's a reversal of the Karan Johar tagline of Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, which was, "It's all about loving your parents." And here I actually talk about how important family is. And when family accepts you, whether it's your own blood family at home, of parents, siblings, and so on, whether it's the families that you create out of choice in terms of the communities you create, or whether it's your work family, right? How important that family feeling and that family acceptance is. And when that happens, how queer people can flourish, right? So I gave all of this, again, with great intent before getting into the, why is inclusion important? And, whether it's, I give 4 reasons: money, innovation, talent, reputation, and many steps that companies can take, whether it's, changing policies, whether for partnership benefits or whether for gender affirmation. whether in actively hiring, whether in sensitizing employees, whether in supporting LGBTQ organizations, community-based organizations, and so on. But I think, all of that only makes sense, and you're only invested in it when you understand the people behind it, and our history and context, right? So which is why I designed it in this particular way. And then I end the book, because it kind of goes on this, on this journey, on this graph. I end this book with this incredible burst of optimism, outlining an ideal world coming up all around us. I look at the changes that are taking place in films, books, politics in some sense, so many different states which are being LGBTQ affirmative, whether it's Chhattisgarh, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, or so on. Efforts in the law, right? Because 377 has gone, but there are still so many efforts in terms of the law, whether it's modification of the Trans Act, which is not at all fair or reflects the aspirations of India's trans citizens, whether it's the efforts which are beginning towards, queer marriage equality, whether it's anti-discrimination laws, and all this is happening already. So I talk about that. I talk about all the incredible young intersectional queer movements which are happening, whether it's Dalit Queer Project, Queer Muslim Project, so many others, inspiring individuals like Grace Banu, who's a trans engineer who has set up this wonderful trans collective village in Tuticorin in collaboration with the collector. So it's a dairy cooperative. The land has been given by the government, and it's a dairy farm which is being run by members of the transgender community. Really good win-win collaborative efforts, right? And I just look at all of these as an indication that we are already moving into an LGBTQ inclusive India, which I affectionately call Queeristan. But I say that to co-create this, we all have to step up and co-create this together. So I wrote the book with intent as a personal diary, as a business book, and I specifically included things like queer movies, TikTok, parties, job fairs, my love life, because I wanted very much to create it like a full-on Bollywood masala film, because I wanted it to create that kind of impact that people finish reading it and then move to action, right? And in this, I want to bring the framework of a wonderful theorist called Gerard Genet, who brought up this concept of paratext. So just very, very briefly, if text is what the body is of your communication, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie or anything, right? Text is what you are saying, the main body of it, right? Subtext is what lies below, what you are implying. You're not directly saying it, but you're kind of implying it, right? And then paratext is everything that comes up around it. It's what your piece of communication empowers, whether it's simple stuff like the design of the book, the media coverage, the font, the conversations that happen because of it, and things like that, right? So I wrote this book with great intent on all these three dimensions. Hiren spoke very, very powerfully and eloquently about how caste and queerness intersect. And the subtext of Queeristan as well is about these kind of intersections, right? How do we weave in intersectionality and the call for social justice within the format of a business book? So I designed the book very much with that intent, because the intended audience are business people, but even as business people are reading it, how can we inject social justice issues within a business book so that the consciousness arises, the awareness about intersectionality arises, and hopefully that makes them more sensitive and proactive. So this is an example of subtext. And the paratext of the book, again, it's the fact that I'm doing this conversation for all of you. It's with great intent, because why should someone who has written a business book talk about communication strategy at a Teach for India conference, right? Very much with intent, because I want very much the paratext of this book to go way beyond business, and to take the spirit of, say, this 377 judgment of 2018 and transform every aspect of our society, whether it is our homes, whether it is our schools and colleges, whether it is our families. So using the book as a stepping stone, I'm doing all these multiple conversations with great intent so that I can really help push for a societal change. Because unless we start changing our attitudes and our beliefs, and unless we start, respecting and loving each other in all these different institutions, we are not going to get that huge change in our Aquaristan, in which every LGBTQ citizen can feel equal, right? Right now, we just have a place where we are not criminals. But between decriminalization and equality, we all have to make that effort as well. And which is why I'm doing this. So which is why, the paratext of the book is conversations like this as well. And I think it's very, very important, especially now, for all of us to be thinking of issues of inclusion on various dimensions, right? I work on LGBTQ, so that's something I'm invested in. I work in the business world. So, I use those platforms. But I think it's fundamental, and I use two terms in the book that I want to share with you all, at this point. One is Jugaad resistance. And it talks about how one can place oneself within the system, whichever system one is operating in, and bring about change from within the system. And this is what I've tried to do at Godrej, and, being at Godrej, trying to influence other organizations to make their policies and practices more LGBTQ inclusive. So the question for all of you is, what can you do being exactly where you are, right? What steps can you do immediately to bring about a change on anything that you might want to believe, anything that you believe in, and that you believe that the world needs to change towards, right? The second framework is cultural acupuncture. It's a framework I borrowed from the Harry Potter Alliance. And it talks about, using the framework of culture to kind of push for specific changes. I mean, so, I kind of change the usage of the term when I use it. I use it to talk about how I've kind of pressed on certain cultural points, at Godrej, using the Culture Lab and other interventions. But the overall thing is that, culture is a very strong force. And if one can find, what aspect of culture and where to press, you can often bring about a huge amount of change in that. And so, one key aspect, I think, in changing mindsets is at least in our country, is using Bollywood, right? So many people use Bollywood so well because there's instant recall. And, you can actually use whether it's stars or whether it's the framework of the song and dance to be used to communicate so much really, really effectively. And so my last video that I want to share with you is something that I feel is a very, very effective piece of communication on all of these levels that I've identified, right? The text is very clear, subtext is extraordinary. And when this video was released, the paratext was incredible. It was UN Free and Equal's first big video in the country. UN Free and Equal is the LGBTQ arm of the UN. And it is so far until now the highest, it's the UN video with the most views. So I hope that, through my talk and through these videos that I've shown you, I've tried to emphasize, and I hope that you've understood that whatever you are doing in terms of communication, please be conscious of the outcomes. So I've got a good question. It's what is the connection between identity and communication? Why should one be aware, and what can teachers, parents, and students do? And I think this is a very good question. I'm assuming it is in the context of LGBTQ identity. And I think it's very, very important, because in India, we don't talk about this in our homes enough. In schools, I'm very, I think I'm just so happy to see so many schools across the country which are beginning to have these conversations. Tagore International in Delhi is one. They have this amazing student volunteer-driven club called Breaking Barriers, where they've been running this, I think, for 7 or 8 years now. And, every year new students come, 9th, 10th, and so on, and they run the club. And it's very much about LGBTQ sensitization, gender sensitization, amongst students, amongst parents, and amongst teachers as well. So I think I think there is a connection because, the world is heteronormative, And given the fact that 4 to 10% of any population happens to be LGBTQ, I think parents and teachers need to be aware that in any class of theirs, there are probably a few children who might be feeling different. So what kind of an atmosphere are we creating in the class or at home with parents, right? What kind of atmosphere are we creating? Are we creating a space where our children are feeling comfortable enough to be themselves? How can we encourage, how can we show acceptance and love and create that environment where the children or the young adults may or may not choose to come out to us, and that's completely their choice. But how can we as educators create that environment where if they choose to come out, they should know that they will not be judged, they will not be scolded or misunderstood, they will just be loved. And there are amazing parents that you can look at as role models. There's a Satyamev Jayate episode with Ghazal Dhaliwal, which I don't know if y'all, there's a great Satyamev, you should see it. It's a couple of years old. It's Amir Khan's iconic show. And Ghazal, who is now a celebrated scriptwriter, she wrote Ek Ladki Ko Dekha, amongst other things, comes on that show, and she has transitioned. And her parents come on that show, and they just say that when Ghazal came out, how they loved and accepted her, how they nurtured her through the transition, how they went to all the neighbors and said, we now have a daughter, her name is Ghazal, we want you to love and respect her the same way as we do. And I think that's key, right? So when your parents, when your teachers love and respect you, it really, really empowers you. Likewise in the workplace. So I think there is a deep connection between your own identity, because when you are queer in a predominantly heterosexual world, it is hard to articulate it, to share it. There are fears, and we're not living in an ideal society. So I think the role of parents and teachers is very important to create that empowering, nurturing space. So thanks everyone. Thanks once again. I know you've had a long and hard day, but I hope you found some use in what I've had to say. So thank you so much to the entire Teach for India team for this opportunity. And of course, part of effective communication is shameless plugging wherever. So if you do get a chance, do check out Queeristan. I've written it with a lot of love, and I hope that you find it useful as well.
Thank you so much, Parmesh, for that. I think it's a very wonderful topic to discuss how important it is to, make our education inclusive. Even the chat where we have lots of people discussing with each other, sharing each other's perspective. Thank you so much for that wonderful session. Dear viewers, please stay tuned for the next session. Welcome back, everyone. We have a great session coming up right now. This is also the last session for this track, Busting the Top 5 Myths in EdTech by Dhruv Kamath. Dhruv is currently an associate product manager at QMath, an EdTech startup. He has been working in the non-profit ed sector for the past 4.5 years. 2 years as a Teach for India Fellow in Mumbai, and 2.5 years as an EdTech program manager in the Central Square Foundation. An engineering graduate from NIT Trichy, Dhruv uses his passion for technology to solve the challenge of making quality education accessible to all children. Welcome, Dhruv. Over to you for the next 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for tuning into my short session about busting the top myths in implementing EdTech in under-resourced settings in India today. Before we begin, a quick introduction about myself. As Elizabeth mentioned, I've been in the nonprofit ed sector for 4 years now. I've spent 2 years at Teach for India as a fellow, where I set up an edtech startup called Code for Hope, where we taught students computational thinking through game-based simulations. And the past 2.5 years I've spent in the Central Square Foundation, where we've supported the large-scale implementation of edtech with state governments across the country. Today, I am an associate product manager at QMath, where I oversee the product development and user research for the core product. So usually, when you think about edtech interventions, right, they usually tend to be either top-down, where the people at the top mandate that all the people in the state use edtech, or they're bottom-up, where teachers, students, and parents basically push the system to increase the adoption of these solutions. But for the very first time in our lives, we have this external factor called COVID that has forced school closures and has forced the system to adopt rapidly and basically increase the usage of edtech. This has in a way led to a fundamental change in people's mindset at every level. So for example, if you think about it, teachers, BRCs and BEOs who used to travel for hours for meetings are now doing all their meetings via virtual conferences with the district offices, which is so unusual for a system that has not adapted that way in the past so many years. And parents who, for example, felt that studies cannot happen with the laptop and smartphone are currently pushing their kids to spend as much time on these Zoom and WhatsApp classes as possible. And in a way, these form a positive feedback loop where as the state basically pushes for more adoption of edtech solutions, the parents and students themselves want to use edtech more. Every state government in India today has transformed its teaching and learning practices, either by creating these cascaded WhatsApp groups with all the parents in the state, or by streaming the content on Diksha TV and radio. And what's interesting is this increase in the demand of edtech has led to a corresponding increase in the supply in terms of funding, research, and the supply of edtech products. And over the past 6 months, I've been speaking to teachers from various types of schools across the country. And I've tried to piece together a story about how edtech is being leveraged by teachers in India today. So depending on who you are, some of these myths may not really seem like myths to you. But I will use these 5 as a lens to talk about some of the best practices that innovative teachers in India are using today. Perfect. So when the pandemic first began, right, the focus was on how we can replicate these in-person classes with online classes. But if you think about it, in-person and online classes have completely different enablers, right? So for example, when you're a teacher in class, as an educator, we know that you have the ability to almost sense the mood of your class while you're teaching. You can provide the very close motivation and socio-emotional support to your students, which is extremely hard to replicate when you teach on Zoom. And at the same time, I'm going to discuss in the talk later, but when you're teaching online, there are several things you can do. For example, you can provide self-paced learning content to your students, and you can even automate a lot of the processes like your homeworks and assessment, which is such a pain when you think about how you can do these things in person. So what I've learned is that teachers have discovered so many things that they can do online that they can't do, that they couldn't have done in person before, right? So for example, a very good practice that I've come across is being the teachers pushing the students to utilize the resources they have available at home. What I almost call designing for the home environment. activities like counting utensils, growing plants, and interacting with your family members at home. And another interesting practice is teachers pushing students to actually lead some of these sessions, to do their own research, and for example, on breakout rooms on Zoom, having students take some of these classes. The whole concept of active learning, right? So the takeaway here would be that online and in-person are completely different enablers, and it makes a lot of sense to think about how you can make the most of classes going online, which is a fundamentally different mode from in-person education. So think about this. I asked a couple of teachers I spoke to think about, what are the top 5 edtech solutions that they can name? And by default, I came across almost the same names every time. I think Byju's was the most popular name, Topper, Vedantu, Unacademy. And I thought, why? Why are these names so common? And it's quite obvious, because we keep seeing these names bombarded to us everywhere, right? Whether it's in the IPL or your front page, Times of India advertisements. So these organizations, they basically spend crores in advertising and getting brand ambassadors like Shah Rukh and Amir Khan. And as a result, because they spend so much on advertising and increasing the awareness of their products, they become very, very expensive. So any of these products that I just mentioned, for example, are not short of 30, 40, 60,000 rupees a year, which is way beyond the budget of most families in our country. And the truth is that there are a lot of excellent organizations, nonprofits, and foundations in our country today that are producing extremely high quality and free content that are built for Tier 2 and Tier 3 India. For example, Central Square Foundation, where I previously used to work at, created this bank of solutions of videos called Tic Tac Learn that cover all concepts in maths from grade 1 to grade 10. And you have Khan Academy, you have Firki that's hosting this very webinar, Kutuki, Story Weaver from Pratham. And these are all excellent sources of content. But what's so sad is that because these are built by foundations, they don't have crores to spend in marketing their products. And as a result, these don't get that much visibility that a Byju's or a Vedantu would get. And it's my strong belief that as educators, we must be aware that these solutions exist in India, and these are as good, if not better than the expensive ones that exist. And if you want to check out some more of these solutions, I recommend you go to the site called indiaedtech.org that we created at CSF that basically lists down a lot of these free edtech solutions used in our country today. And another interesting consequence of these organizations marketing the product so well to parents at home is that you have this notion that edtech is only about students downloading apps on their phone and using it at home. And that's quite untrue, because research that we've done at Central Square Foundation has led us to believe that there are multiple use cases of edtech in the teaching and learning process, right? And if you can just spend a minute on my screen, I know it's fairly dense, full of text, but we have found 8 key use cases, right? From lesson preparation to homework to assessments to parent participation and parent-teacher communication. And these are all critical aspects of the teaching and learning process. And each and every one of these aspects has multiple edtech solutions through which you can do these. So as educators, you need to think about all of these use cases and try to see which solutions we want to use to sort of smoothen down which of the processes. And at the end of this talk, I'll be showing you a couple of edtech solutions in each of these buckets, which you might find quite useful. So I spoke to many teachers, right? And a lot of them claim that online teaching is extremely time consuming. And they mentioned, when I asked them, what are you spending time on when you say online teaching is time consuming? They spend the most time in recording their video lessons and correcting assessments. And if you think about this, right, in the past 7 months especially, content has become so widely accessible. There are so many teachers across the country, including Teach for India fellows and government school teachers, who have made hours and hours of content covering every single concept in every single syllabus across our country. And they're all free of cost on YouTube. And all this is in addition to the free edtech sort of solutions I showed you 2 slides earlier. So today it's completely unnecessary to create your own videos and your own content when there is so much good free edtech solutions out there. And what I almost I'd almost push you to think about is, what are the kinds of things that humans can do really well, and what are the kinds of things that computers can do really well? So what we call these interpersonal human processes, like forming personal connects with students and social emotional support that I spoke about, these are things that technology cannot do really well today. But at the same time, assessment correction, homework correction, creating lessons, these are all things that are available online. So as educators, I think it's very important for us to think about where we can spend our energy most efficiently. Or rather, what is the trade-off? If we spend, for example, 1 hour in creating a lesson when there are already so many lessons out there, versus if you spend that 1 hour in doing a small group discussion with a bunch of 5 students, which one do we think will lead to greater improvement in student learning? Right? That's how I think we can think more effectively about how we use our time, because it's quite obvious that stuff that can be done by technology today should be done by technology. And as teachers, we should be spending more time connecting one-on-one with our students. And so myth 5, and I think this is the most, the most abstract myth among the ones that I spoke today. But at the beginning of the lockdown, a lot of people thought that infrastructure and a lack of technical skills would be the largest hurdle to effective online teaching, right? But today we've seen that students with access to even the Dabba phones, TV and radio are also able to access online education really well. And as I mentioned, right, most state governments have already set up these cascaded WhatsApp groups and TV and radio broadcasts in a period of weeks since the lockdown began on March 24th. So the most important factor has been not the technical ability and infrastructure to some level, but not so much the infrastructure, but the mindset of the teachers. And most importantly, how the school leader or the principal has set a clear vision and expectations from the students and the teachers. And a lot of organizations today, and to name a few, TFI, FIRKI, 321, iTeach, all of whom I think have spoken in this same webinar, they've all created really strong online learning strategies and basically full unit plans. So if you are a principal or a teacher and you're listening to this, I would really strongly approach you. I would request you to approach someone from these organizations and basically take an existing online learning strategy that already exists and try to contextualize it to your own for your own school. And in the same spirit as the last myth, think about whether you want to spend your time in improving a product for your school or creating it from scratch. And some of the best practices that I came across, when I was speaking to a few teachers from across the country, was that we need to leverage parents as much as possible as partners in this. Because in the in-person model, what used to happen was that parents would be somewhat involved in the process, but not so much because they didn't have a lot of visibility in terms of what's going on. But right now, parents are with their children all the time. So that makes a lot of sense to bring them into the teaching and learning process. And another good practice is basically building a routine for the child and following the same routine every day and providing them incentives for small things like coming to class on time, because that accountability is quite difficult to maintain when everything is online. So, I'd like to, these are the main 5 myths that I saw when I was doing a bit of research for this talk. And I hope you take away a couple of important points from this. And on the slide right now, I'm just going to keep this for a minute, but I put together some really good, either free or freemium edtech solutions that cater to each of those use cases. So for example, if you want to see what are the free products out there for assessments, you can check out Kahoot and Quizzes. And also on the right-hand side, I've put together some organizations that have created really good online learning resources like FIRKI and 321. And of course, you can go to India EdTech to check out a lot of free EdTech solutions. Thank you so much, everyone. Elizabeth, are there any questions on the chat?
Thank you so much, Dhruv. We'll just check the chat if they have any questions that are coming up. So dear viewers, if you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box and Dhruv will address. There was one question. So if teachers depend a lot on internet or videos, what is the role of teachers? Will that get compromised? So what do you think about that? Will technology overpower teachers?
That's a wonderful question. I think since I've begun my journey in EdTech, that's one of the main fears of teachers that I've come across. They're fearful of whether technology will take over their work. And I think at least for the next 50 years, that's not going to be the case, because what teachers really bring to the whole teaching and learning process is that emotional and that interpersonal connect with the child. So if I can talk about, what, as I mentioned, right, we need to think, teachers as educators, they need to think about what are things that can be automated in the classroom and use tools to automate those as far as possible and spend as much of their own time in supporting the students emotionally. And I think that would be the main role I would see teachers playing in online learning.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that was one of the main questions. There was one more question. How can the videos available on internet meet standards of students? Not all videos can assist our students to comprehend the content. So what can teachers do for that? I think that was the last question.
Okay. If I understand the question right, how can teachers basically maintain the quality of content? How do they know if a content is good enough for the students or not?
So there are lots of videos available on internet. So how can it meet the need of all children?
Understood. Okay. I think that's where the teacher's role comes in, because there's so much free solutions out there, both on YouTube as well as from some of the organizations that I described some time back, that we really need to see which of those would be understood by our students, right? So if you spend a bit of time online, you would find these YouTube channels, and maybe after this conversation, I can even, if people are interested, I can send some of those to them. But you have these YouTube channels that have content contextualized for different kinds of learners, or learners at different speeds, for example, and in different languages. And I think it's the teacher's responsibility to identify these sources of content from all of these various places and provide the students with that curated list.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dhruv, for that. And I think we're also up for that time. It was wonderful to have you here. And I think the strategies, that's what is very useful for the teachers now. Simple things that we can use in our classroom, specifically in this world where we have to depend a lot on tech. Thank you so much for that. Dear viewers, we have one more session coming up in track 1. So we have pasted the link in the chat box. Please visit track 1 for a session with Sal Khan. Thank you, Dhruv, for that.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.